Hello, everyone. Good afternoon to all of you who are tuning into our World Refugee Day webinar here at Refugees International. I am actually joining you today from Geneva, where I'm spending part of this week in intensive discussions with other humanitarian colleagues about the future of the humanitarian system and about how we adapt global humanitarian response and global refugee response to this really unprecedented collapse in global funding that is hitting displaced people so incredibly hard at the moment. Um, and it is timely to be here as we approach World Refugee Day. We're doing the webinar today a little bit early because World Refugee Day is a Friday and tomorrow is, of course, the Juneteenth holiday in the US. Um, but it is an incredibly challenging time. If you're tuning into this webinar and if you're a supporter of Refugees International, we don't need to tell you that global displacement is at historic levels. There has never been more displaced people in the world in at least several generations. And the resources and the support, and not just the financial resources, the global political will to deal with some of these displacement challenges is under pretty historic threat. Um, we have seen here in the US, but also in refugee hosting countries around the world, pretty unprecedented attacks and erosion of political support for asylum. Of course, here in the US, as we're reading in the headlines every day, there are attacks on the rights and the protection of refugees and displaced people. You'll be hearing this afternoon from a number of our advocates who've been on the front lines of that, who have been interviewing and researching and directly talking with and telling the stories of and lifting up the voices and the experiences of some of the displaced people who have been directly affected by those attacks on protection and by that undermining of the asylum system here in the US and abroad. And it's incredibly powerful, and it really reinforces, I think, why the role of Refugees International is so incredibly important at this moment. Our ability to be an independent voice, to speak truth to power and speak truth to people at a time when that truth is often very intentionally obscured, when that truth is very awkward, inconvenient, or problematic for people who are in power. We are here to speak that truth. We're also really thrilled to be joined here and honored to be joined here today by a number of our esteemed refugee fellows. So the refugee fellows join us for a year of intensive partnership and collaboration. These are activists who are very notable, very prominent, very powerful and inspiring people who are leading advocacy on behalf of their own communities. And we are really proud to be partnering with and supporting them. And you're going to hear some of their powerful experiences here today. And that, I think, shows the kind of duality that we face in our world at the moment. We face unprecedented attacks from political actors on the very foundations of the global refugee system. And at the same time, we see this incredible inspiration and power and moral clarity from refugee leaders themselves about what needs to happen. And so that is, I think, fundamental to the future of where we want to be as a refugee-focused organization, working in allyship and solidarity with refugee leaders to lift up their influence in a really challenging moment for the world. As many of you know, but it's always worth saying, we are able to have this independence because we take no government or UN funding. And that is a long-standing position that dates back to the earliest days of Refugees International. It enables us in moments like this one to be able to speak out, to be able to call out the problems that we see, to be able to put forward solutions, and to push political leaders to hold governments and humanitarian organizations accountable at times like this when that is extremely important. And somewhat rare. And so we are able to do that because of the support of people like you who are tuning in today. And I would ask that if you find purpose, if you find value, if you find meaning in what you hear here today, if you find inspiration in what you hear here today, please consider supporting us and our World Refugee Day appeal that we have ongoing at the moment. With that, I'm going to hand over to our colleague Mohammed Naeem, who will be moderating the rest of the discussion today. And again, thank you so much for joining us. It is such a privilege to be talking with all of you, and it's I know you're going to have a really inspiring next hour with all of our amazing colleagues. Thank you, and Mohammed, over to you.
All right, thank you so much, Jeremy, for that sort of brilliant sort of setting of the frame here for our conversation today. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to colleagues and friends joining us from all corners of our globe. A warm and hearty welcome to our World Refugee Day conversation. My name, as Jeremy had sort of noted, is Mohammed Naeem, and I serve as RI Senior Director for Advocacy Strategy. It is really my honor to moderate today's discussion, and joining me are lifelong advocates, to Jeremy's earlier points, whose expertise on the issues that are most pressing across sort of the refugee and migration policy space really spans the globe. Today, you'll hear from extraordinary individuals, colleagues, and fellows who are covering Asia, the Middle East, Africa, and across the Americas. Um, just to add on to a bit of what Jeremy had sort of shared at the very top, these are not ordinary days. And so as we pause today and on Friday to reflect on where we are, where our sector is, where our space is, where our communities are, and really what we're heading into. I am really grateful that we can do so by centering refugees as part of our discussion. And it's a call to all of us to continue to do that as we navigate sort of the terrain ahead. Many of you are intimately familiar with the data, FDP numbers, north of 120 million, exponential increases over the last decade, and just on and on. While all of that is horrifically true, what is also true is that there is extraordinary work being done, to Jeremy's earlier points. From the brave work of refugee-led organizations like the emergency response rooms in Sudan, to advocacy groups, some of whom are reflected in our audiences today, to community leaders here across the United States stepping forward to support their immigrant and refugee neighbors, walking them to their court hearings and so forth. There has always been a movement, and there continues to be a movement brewing to showcase really the better nature of our countries and our societies, and also the better nature of our ideas towards hopefully greater refuge and permanent solutions to the displacement crisis that has forever been protracted and for too long, in fact. Um, Now, I don't want to take up too much of your time, so a few quick items. We will cover a range of topics today. One, what does refugee protection look like in today's world across the context that I had noted above? Where are the gaps, and how can we build the kind of collective action and resolve needed to meet this moment with refugees centered in it? I'll introduce each panelist as we move along. We welcome your Q&A at the very end, of course, but if you feel so, please do chat us your questions, and I'll get to them as quickly as I can. But again, thank you for joining us from wherever you're calling in from. Let's begin. So first up, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Dr. Yael Shaker. Yael is our director for the Americas and Europe. She has extensive background in research and advocacy at the intersection of immigration, asylum, and refugee policy, and has also taught courses on these issues at Georgetown and the University of Connecticut, just to name a few. So welcome, Yael. Really looking forward to today's discussion. I wanted to begin by maybe offering you a chance to share a bit about our recently launched Let Them Stay campaign. And really, from your perspective, what are some of the current and ongoing threats to humanitarian protection of parolees across the United States? But feel free to fill it in, for the way in which this also applies to global context. So, Yael, welcome again.
Thanks so much, Mohammed, and it's just an honor to be here with you today at this very difficult but crucial time for refugee protection. Just to back up a little bit for some context, The last administration responded to the US administration, I mean, responded to the huge need that Jeremy mentioned at the top for safe migration pathways and for protection for displaced people by using humanitarian parole in a large way to help people come to the United States from Afghanistan, from Ukraine, from Cuba, Haiti, Venezuela, and Nicaragua, from Central America, and beyond. Um, the Trump administration has begun terminating the parole status en masse of all the people that were welcomed previously. Not only that, it's really taken the next step to not only terminate their status, but terminate their legal permission to work in the United States and actually arrest people on parole, detain them, and put them in removal proceedings to try to deport them either to their home country, which is usually a country in crisis, or to a third country that they've never been to through deals with other countries accepting third country nationals. And I just want to emphasize that most of these parolees, these people who had came in on parole, I mentioned some of the countries they were from, they are pursuing, while after entering on that humanitarian status, they are pursuing other forms of immigration relief or asylum or permanent statuses. Many of them have outstanding asylum applications in the court. And some of you may have, if you're following sort of US media, one of the main places that the Trump administration is turning to arrest people, parolees, are people who are actually going to their court hearings to continue to pursue their asylum application. So what we're seeing is this a general attack on the due process rights of people in the United States, really rolling in the parolee population that I'm talking to. Basically, the people who waited online, came the right way into this country, have humanitarian protection needs, and are pursuing additional and more permanent forms of protection in the United States. Those are the people who are under attack right now. And I really see this attack on humanitarian parole as part of a larger attack by the administration on legal and humanitarian immigration writ large. So similar to the ban on refugee resettlement, for example, but also the delegalizing of people in the United States on protected statuses, many of whom are living in this country with relatives and friends, are working steadily at essential jobs in our economy, and are integrating into American communities. So what the Let Them Stay campaign is really an effort to spread awareness about the danger of these Trump administration policies. As part of the campaign, we have been meeting regularly with diaspora groups and supporters of people who have come in on humanitarian parole, including sponsors of people. Lots of times they're relatives, sometimes they're employers, and also the litigators who are challenging the administration's termination of parole and arrest of parolees in court. As part of the campaign, we have created resources for parolees themselves, people who are at risk of loss of their legal right to work, arrest, and deportation. We've created videos of parolees, their sponsors, their communities, sort of testimonies to their vitality to this country and the reason why it's important to push back and to push back against the policies that threaten parole and to tell the administration, let them stay. We want them to stay. Right, last thing I'll mention about this is that we've created sort of take action on our landing page so that the public can contact their congressional representatives to voice support for parole and opposition specifically to a funding package that's moving through the American Congress right now, mostly because the funding is almost all directed towards immigration enforcement that will allow a sort of ratcheting up of the enforcement against these parolees. It won't only hurt the poorest American families by stripping them of their Medicaid, for example, as some of you who follow American politics might be aware. It will also enable the administration to arrest and deport parolees to danger, either to their home countries or third countries. So this is the kind of thing that we
Yeah.
really hope through our campaign to raise awareness about, help protect parolees, and gain support and understanding from the American public about why it's such an important form of protection.
Yeah, thank you, Yael, for providing that cover. And what we will see over the potentially the coming weeks and the coming months is the expansive, or really the expansion of what we've already seen on our screens, on our phones, et cetera, in light of some of the sort of legislation and funding legislation in particular that the Trump administration would like to sign. Um, but yet to see if Congress will move on it over the next sort of month. And please continue to tune into RI's resources so that we can provide those updates as legislative, as some of the legislation continues to move through Congress. Yael, I'm going to move on to Dan, and then we're going to return back to do some for you to provide some context for your Costa Rica report and some of the nexus between deportations and foreign aid cuts. But thank you so much. So next, I'd like to turn to sort of our colleague Dan Sullivan. Dan is our director for Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. Dan has over 20 years of human rights and foreign policy experience between several sort of leading organizations. And over the last few years in particular, Dan has spearheaded RI's advocacy related to the growing genocide in Sudan, amongst just other critical areas of work. So Dan, welcome. Would love for you to give our audience an update on just the evolving crisis situation in Sudan, and in really building on your work and the work of our team. Why have we, as an organization, chosen to so focus our advocacy on the role of the UAE, as well as other actors arming, sort of continuing to ship arms into the country? Would love for you to give a bit of scope for our Donald Cheadle video, and what action are you urging the public and policymakers to take? So Dan, welcome again. Yeah, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Mohammed. Yeah, I guess just to first set the stage, in we're facing very grave challenges. We've got this theme, right, of there's both unprecedented challenges, but also some very great bright spots. And I think that you really see that in Sudan today, where we're facing what is, by the numbers, the largest displacement and hunger crisis in the world right now. Areas of Darfur already in famine levels or conditions, and indications that as we head into the rainy season and the lean season to follow, that we're going to see even more areas that are affected by famine and severe food insecurity. But at the same time, you have the real inspiration of the local emergency response rooms, the local and other mutual aid groups, local Sudanese who have really been on the front lines. So Sudan, we've been traveling there particularly over the last 2+ years since the current crisis began, and traveling to different countries that are affected by displacement, and reporting back on what's going on. I think one thing to really keep an eye on is, as we see the effects of the U.S. aid cuts and broader aid cuts and aid freezes, I think Sudan will be if not the, then one of the most severely affected places, where we already have seen those local groups that are trying to lead efforts have had to shut down many of their communal kitchens, being affected by this. So it's an area that we're going to continue to focus on. It's a critical moment because of the heading into the lean season. And as we continue to see how the country gets kind of torn apart by the two main actors, the Rapid Support Forces and the Sudanese Armed Forces and their allied militias. Now, to your question of why have we focused on the UAE, the United Arab Emirates, it's because of the role that they've played in this, and they're not the only ones. I think it's as an example of, there are a lot of external actors who are supporting the two sides and fueling atrocities, and fueling this the fighting going on, and supporting both sides, which are responsible for blocking aid from getting in. So some really there's the actors inside, but the external actors are playing a huge role in, and the UAE stands out because it's been particularly egregious in supplying weapons directly to the RSF, which the United States and others have found is responsible for genocide. So it's a pretty stark example. And as with the Sudanese crisis at large, the role of the UAE is not getting the kind of attention that it should be getting. Now, there have been a lot of efforts. A lot of our partners have been working on this. We worked with partners and with the actor Don Cheadle to do a short video explainer of what the role of the UAE has been in Sudan. And we have tried to reach out to the NBA and to performers like Trevor Noah and others who have had partnerships with the UAE to make sure they understand what the role is and to use their influence to push the UAE to play a more constructive role in Sudan and to stop supplying the RSF with weapons. And that continues. And we saw last week, outreach to the U.S. Congress led to a vote on measures that would have blocked the sale of further U.S. weapons to the UAE, citing in part their role in Sudan. So that's we unfortunately did not go through, but there was a significant number of senators who voted for that, and I think it was a really important message to the UAE and others, and just another part of the efforts to build the general awareness on Sudan and the role of external actors like the UAE. So we're going to continue that. You can see in the chat a couple of things that you can do to help to build this awareness. And one is take a look at, if you haven't seen already, this short video and share it with your networks so that people know what that role is that the UAE and other external actors are playing. And then secondly, if you're in the United States, please contact your member of Congress. They need to know and continue to know that this is something that people care about and are worried about. So I'll leave it there. And just one more shout out to the inspiring partners we've had in the emergency response rooms and other local groups working there. And with that, I'll turn it back to you, Mohammed. Thank you.
All right, thanks. Thank you so much for that, Dan. And just about a month ago, Refugees International honored the emergency response rooms with our Richard C. Holbrooke Award at our annual awards dinner. They're doing extraordinary work on the ground, and that they deserve every bit of that award and every other award that hopefully will sort of come your way, will come their way. So now we're going to move on to the portion of our conversation today, really spotlighting our refugee fellows. Our refugee fellows are extraordinary leaders in their own right, working across some of the most difficult, protracted crisis zones across the globe. Each have been part of a year-long Refugee International's fellowship, participating in peer-to-peer learning, both formal and informal training sessions with advocacy, policy, and other communications experts. And so I'm so thrilled to be joined by them, and really so honored to sort of share the same space sort of today. And first up, we have Jumana Abu Nakhla. Jumana is originally from Gaza and is a women peace and security scholar. She has spent the last year plus, really probably all her life, documenting testimonies of survivors of the war and advocating for her community's needs, including in Egypt, where she was until just recently, having been displaced with her family. Jumana, so grateful to you for joining us today, and a warm welcome. As I just sort of noted there, you were recently in Egypt and witnessed firsthand some of the challenges facing Palestinians from Gaza who have fled there. People who are often forgotten in the broader media narrative on the conflict. What is your experience? What was your community's experience in Egypt in particular? And what kind of support do they need right now so that they too aren't forgotten?
Thank you, Muhammad. Yes, many Gazans were forcibly to Egypt. Maybe they are now out of the immediate danger. There is no longer, they are no longer within the framework or the range of airstrikes or collapsing buildings or even the current systematic hunger. But they are not out of a crisis. What they are now facing is a different kind of violence, a structural, legal, and emotional one. They are stateless and undocumented. Without any legal status, they cannot access to basic services. They cannot have any jobs, no health care, or even the ability to open a bank account. This is kind of impossible. And the slightest thing to register a phone number became a dream to Gazans. They live in legal invisibility. Most of us have lost everything: homes, livelihoods, and loved ones. And yet they are offered no path to stability. Children are out of schools, families are overcrowded into temporary shelters, or even worse, overpriced apartments, because a lot of Egyptians and other nationalities view them as people who ran away from war or genocide, paying thousands of dollars so they can pay apartments with overpriced. Medical care is either inaccessible or extremely expensive unless they are medically evacuated. This is another limbo. We don't have the time to discuss or unpack it here. This is why we urgently need the international community to respond, not with the statements, but with action. UN bodies, especially UNHCR and UNRWA, must reactivate their institutional responsibility for my people. And above all, any humanitarian response must be rooted in the rights and the voices of those displaced. So, yes, they may be out of danger, but they are far away from safe. They are still living in a crisis, just one that the world has turned a blind eye to it.
Um, Thank you for just a real sobering reminder. And I think what I'm taking away personally, and I hope our audience sort of picked this up as well, it's the structural, the legal, and the emotional sort of guardrails and walls that surround refugees, seemingly not just in places of conflict, but really as they continue to move. So critical to sort of land on that. And then I think the phone number being a dream. That's such an extraordinary and powerful quote. So thank you for sharing that perspective, and I hope our audience sort of takes full stock of the real challenges that Khazans have faced, as some of them have moved cross border into sort of regional countries. Um, I want to touch on your recently released short film. Jobana's a filmmaker as well. And she released a short film documenting your return to Yibna, your grandmother's hometown from which she was displaced Gaza in 1948, and as well as your own displacement, including some of the first days at the start of the war in October of 2023, and then your exile to Egypt. So happy to note that your film received an incredible award, coming in third place in the Al Jazeera Documentary Short Film Competition 2025. Congratulations. That's no small feat. My colleagues will add the link to the film in the chat. Really invite folks to watch it. Can you tell us a little bit more about what inspired you, Jamana, to create the film, and what do you want people to understand from it?
So my film, I Was Born There, here is kind of my personal testimony of what I have lived. It began with my journey leaving the besieged Gaza Strip, passing by Yibna, which is my grandparents' hometown, from which they were forcibly displaced in 1948. I grew up listening to them speak about Yibna with such longing, as if they had lived their souls there. But the irony is painful. A few months later, from that visit, I found myself displaced too, fleeing my own home in Gaza after 6 months of living through the genocide. So the film captures those very first days. It is kind of the lighter version because what comes after is even more horrifying and more unspeakable. as a Palestinian in exile, I find myself living in loop. My grandparents lived as refugees, dreaming of returning to Yibna. And now I stand in their place, longing to see both their Yibna and my Gaza. The film tries to capture this generational exile where the history keeps repeating itself. So I truly invite you to watch it to understand the full picture of Palestine.
Thank you. There Yevna and your Gaza. That was just that. I have to admit that hit me different. Well, thank you so much for your advocacy. We're so grateful for you to join us today, and we're just extraordinarily proud to continue to support your leadership and your work. And so may Gazans and Palestinians realize a day that is free from violence and conflict, and return to their lands. So thank you, Jumana. So now we're going to turn to our next refugee fellow, William Adrian Clavijo Witt. So William is the president and the founder of the Venezuela Global Association, the first association, in fact, founded and led by Venezuelans in the state of Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, really aimed at protecting the social and economic integration of Venezuelan migrants and refugees and those of other nationalities in Brazil. William, welcome. I know you're on the move a little bit here today, this morning, but really appreciate you joining the conversation today. So you've been deeply engaged in advocating for innovative policies, integration policies, as the government of Brazil is now, in fact, pursuing to integrate many refugees and critically ensuring that they are involved in the policy process in a meaningful way, so that their perspectives and their ideas and their solutions are sort of integrated into the work. Can you tell us a little bit about Brazil's approach in particular to refugee integration? And can that model serve for other countries across the Americas? So William, over to you, and hearty welcome.
Thank you, Mohammed. Thank you for the opportunity to all the team of Refugees International for the opportunity to be here talking with all of you. And I would like to harness the opportunity to congrats to all my fellow colleagues in our day. Because it's important to highlight the work that we are carrying out in the place where we are in order to support immigrants and refugees in the process of integration in hosting societies. Just talking a little bit about the question, trying to answer your question. I think that Brazil is a particular case, but in a good way. But because even that is a developing country where we find many challenges for the inclusion of vulnerable groups, including immigrant refugees and stateless people, there are many opportunities to improve the condition of this, to harness and to make progress in the integration of these communities. And part of these particularities are related to a combination of policies, a regulatory framework who allow the participation and integration of this population for getting access to public services. The regulatory framework also allow this population to get a regular status in the country, or being allow the provision of mechanism for the protection of this population. And also we must add the current situation, the political situation and the current situation in the country, where we have an administration who is willing to make progress in the implementation of a national policy to support immigrants and refugees in their process of socioeconomic integration in Brazil. In addition, we must add that I live in a country which is a federation, where states and local governments have a lot of autonomy for the formulation and implementation of public policies. And you can see many cases where these states and municipalities are taking action to remove barriers for the integration of this of immigrant and refugees communities, and implementing policies to support them in many ways. In addition, it's a tradition, and it is established in the Brazilian Constitution, the creation of mechanisms for social participation, and it also includes immigrants and refugees. And I'm reaching this point to highlight that we have seen a very important effort from the federal government to support immigrants and refugees, and gather their interests and listen to them in order to formulate and implementing this national policy that we are waiting to be enacted in the following months. So this is an important case. I think that we must recognize that in this context where we see many governments closing doors to immigrants and refugees, which is so sad, and I'm totally disagree with this behavior of many politicians. We see a Brazil where immigration is not a polemic topic and is not used as a topic for political purpose. And we see a government trying to make progress in order to support this population. So this is a very important case which should be highlighted. In addition to other experience that we have seen that the Brazilian states are carrying out in order to support vulnerable peoples and respond to migration fluxes of vulnerable people such as the Venezuelan. And in this case, we have other cases that probably are not related to meaningful participation, but are complementary. So yes, we can talk about in the Brazilian case a mix of policies who has allowed the creation of a response to try to solve many of the challenges that vulnerable populations such as immigrants and refugees are facing. But just to conclude, Mohammed, I'm saying I say this because I think that we must recognize that some things are being doing in a good way in Brazil, but I'm not satisfied with the results. We are still waiting for the enactment of this policy. We understand that even with all the progress that we have seen during the last couple of years, there is a lot of work that we have to do in order to really guarantee the access to rights for immigrants and refugees, because the recognition is in the law. But we know that there are many barriers that that this population is facing in order to exercise their rights in a properly way. So we must continue to work to maintain dialogue with the Brazilian authorities, and try to propose and highlight the topics and yes, there's a specific topics where we consider that there is a space for improvement. And I think that this is our part. This is our responsibility as civil society leaders, as representative of civil society organization. Thank you.
Thank you so much, William. And yeah, I see claps and I see hearts, all really good signs, which means that, you know, what you've noted is that not a satisfaction with sort of where the situation is. And I think what you're highlighting are two really important points, and it's really embedded as part of our refugee fellows, our fellowship, which is that refugee contribution is not a window dressing. what really refugees are asking for is an integral role in shaping the very policies that so deeply impact their lives and the lives of their communities and their families. And Venezuela being the largest displacement crisis across the Western Hemisphere, it's both a timely but also an extraordinarily important sort of factor. Thank you for your advocacy. We're so grateful to you for being part of our fellowship, but also for joining us today, William. So next, we will now cross the Atlantic back toward the other side of the globe, towards Africa. So joining us is Ayu Irene Helen, who is a South Sudanese refugee in the Dongo refugee settlement in Uganda. Wow, you have to keep me honest. I want you to tell me if I pronounced that right or not. I know Ayu, your work is extraordinary because it deals with what I consider to be the biggest threat to our existence as a civilization on this planet, which is climate adaptation, or climate adaptation in response to climate change, in mitigation efforts. So your focus is specifically on solar electricity for cooking, really building a sustainable solution that could reduce conflict, prevent school dropouts, and minimize cases of assault and in settlements across both the continent, but certainly across the world. Ayu, thank you for joining us. Thank you for your extraordinary work and your leadership and your vision here. So you've been leading a series of consultations with refugee climate advocates throughout Uganda to understand what they are doing to tackle climate change. And I know you're working really hard to ensure that that expertise is included in international climate discussions such as COP and some and other sort of formats and places. What are some of your biggest takeaways you've learned through these consultations? And welcome again.
Thank you so much. I would love to start my conversation with a question, maybe among the audience, if there's anybody that comes from a country where the National Adaptation Plan includes the refugees. So I come from a refugee settlement where we don't read climate reports, we live them. Our crops are washed away, they die because of droughts. We move a long distance in search of water and food and firewood. And yet our stories are not included when it comes to designing climate solutions, because we are seen as people with needs, but not people with ideas. And these are the reason why I'm advocating for the inclusion of refugees in NAP for Uganda. We have done consultation in Kiriandongo, in my settlement where I come from. I'm born and raised in that settlement. And then we've also done consultation in BDBD with refugee-led organization, really to understand whether there's need to include their voice in the National Adaptation Plan for Uganda. With the current population of refugees in Uganda, with the new influx of Sudanese refugees, we are 1.9 million refugees now in Uganda. That means at least our voice should be considered in policy development. It's very key. And we had these discussions because the refugee-led organizations in Uganda are doing quite amazing work, which are not reflected anywhere. And there are series of climate crises that unfold within different refugee settlements. For example, last year, the whole of Palorinya was, flooded with rain, and refugees were climbing up just to survive. And refugees-led organizations were supporting refugees, making sure that they move away from the affected areas to other areas, to the safe areas. So we've done consultation, and refugees in Uganda find it very important for their voice to be included in the National Adaptation Plan. This next month, in July, we are going to have the regional consultation in Kampala, where we are going to bring 65 refugee leaders from across Uganda to discuss the issue of NAP. And we are going to bring the government on board, UNHCR, implementing partners in Uganda, at least to discuss why is it important to include us in the NAP for Uganda. And is it also important to have refugee leaders in the NAP committee for Uganda? So this is the work I'm doing, and my focus is just to make sure that refugees in Uganda reflect in the National Adaptation Plan. And in the whole world, there's no any national adaptation plan that includes refugees. And yet, there are different partners that are supporting NAP in different countries. But none of these national adaptation plan include the voice of refugees. So this is what I'm doing in Uganda. And of course, us alone, we cannot influence the change that we want to see. So all of us together will be able to influence and talk to the government to include the voice of refugees. And during the World Refugee Day for this year, I would love to say the World Refugee Day for this year, I ask us to show real solidarity. Let's change the system. Let's bring climate financing and solution into refugee camps, not just handout, but partnerships. We need climate smart energy, water, and food system now, not later. Thank you, Mohammed.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much, Ayu, for that, and really for your just like visionary work doing this. Not just the fact that it's a protracted crisis, but also a crisis in which there's very little thought to climate adaptation within the context of sort of refugee movements. And so you're raising an issue that should be really tops of the protection agenda around the world. And I know that there are colleagues who are joining us from many parts who are thinking about this. So we are now moving into our sort of Q&A sort of section. I do want to just flag that we had one of our a fourth fellow, Lucky Kareem, was unable to join us today. Many of you know Lucky. She is a refugee and human rights activist from Burma. She's the founder of the Refugee Women for Peace and Justice organization, and really was one of the first, if not the first, Rohingya, which was one of the first Rohingya refugee-led registered organization that works directly with her community. And Lucky just returned from where she was from her refugee camp just not too long ago with In Fact Dan, earlier and a few months ago. And we just released a report, and my colleagues will share that report just a little bit in the chat. So we welcome or encourage you all to sort of preview that. But just wanted to acknowledge Lucky's leadership on this issue in particular. So we are now going to move into Q&A for the next sort of 10 or so minutes. So if you have any questions, feel free to chat them in. I will, as questions are sort of coming in, let me just make sure I've got it here. Excellent. I'm gonna move. Yael, I'd love to bring you in here. I know that just you traveled to Costa Rica recently, really to examine the nexus between deportations and foreign aid cuts, and really including covering or investigating some of the horrific treatment that asylum seekers received at the hands of CBP stateside. Can you share with our audience what you heard and what you saw? I can say transparently that what your findings hit me in a way that was just profound. And I think our audience needs to hear it and needs to amplify it. So Yael, welcome again. Yeah, would love for you to cover this.
Thanks so much. I guess, the trip to Costa Rica revealed so many of the ways the Trump administration has sort of turned its back on the most vulnerable migrants and asylum seekers. Just the overall context is that by cutting funding for UNHCR and other humanitarian aid for migrants, the Trump administration is undermining the ability of Costa Rica itself to process asylum applications by, like, for example, the many Nicaraguans that are there. And while we were in Costa Rica, we met many Venezuelans who had tried to seek asylum in the United States, and they had waited for these appointments to ask for asylum at the US border via the CBP1 app, only to have their registrations and appointments canceled. And now they were desperately moving south and looking for safety. The main shelter in Costa Rica was closed to them, mostly because it was housing families, most of them from Central Asia, Afghanistan, Russia, who had sought asylum at the US border, but had been flown to Costa Rica by the US Department of Homeland Security after they were held in horrible conditions in Border Patrol custody, without access to any due process, without access to the chance to seek asylum for several weeks. We're talking about families, moms with kids, families were deprived of food, the ability to go outside. They were held for 5 weeks. We had situations where a mom came with kids. She was separated from her teenage son, he was 12 or 13 for weeks, didn't see him, were kept in separate rooms. One Afghan family that complained about the mistreatment that they received, and asked to be able to seek asylum rather than being sent to who knows where, was actually threatened to be deported without their young child. In other words, Border Patrol said, if you don't be quiet and accept deportation, we'll just deport you without your daughter. And we'll hold your daughter. This is the kind of treatment that I was seeing. And I just want to say, I too, Mohammed, I've been working at Refugees International for almost 7 years, and I visited numerous ICE detention facilities, Border Patrol facilities, and I will say this was some of the most horrible treatment I've seen, mostly because, there was this myth that nobody was coming in at the border and everything was closed. And the bill I talked about in Congress before, that's moving through Congress now, basically gives the Department of Homeland Security a blank check to create more of these kinds of facilities without any oversight. One of the men who was from Iran, who was sent to Costa Rica, his wife is still in detention at the border. That was for months she's been there. So these are the kinds of things that we can't let continue, and I'm really
Right.
worried about it happening more.
Yeah, and really encourage the audience to check out our report with Human Rights First. It's just an extraordinary telling of the treatment that asylum seekers have received, but one that we know is occurring across the southern border and across detention facilities in the United States, and we fear that will increase in the sort of months and years ahead. So would love everyone to sort of come back into the frame here. Um, we received a question from the chat, and welcome any of our participants to answer this. Sort of given the growing hostility towards displaced people, the likes of which you just heard from Yael, and some of the shrinking civic space, because of the aid cuts and just other sort of issues, what forms of action have each of you found most effective, especially for those who don't have formal platforms? And how can the public make or take a meaningful stand on these kinds of issues? So anybody can join in. Jomana, Ayu, Dan. Actually, let's go to you, Jomana, first on that. For folks who don't have a formal platform, what recommendations would you have to sort of ensure that their voices are heard, and that they can participate in some of the sort of building that we've all suggested here?
If the question is about how can I convey the message of my people to the world when I don't have any professional or any platform, I believe the message would be is always voice what you need and what you suffer. And first, I thought it is nonsense and it is a waste of time to talk about things that is happening to displaced people who are fled from a genocide. It sounded like it is a lighter kind of suffering, and I thought this is not. It is going to be, kind of and confuse the audience. I wanted the focus to be on the Gazans who are still stuck in Gaza. But afterwards, I felt whenever I sit with Palestinians from Gaza who are stranded in Egypt, I felt it is kind of a different kind of suffering with no one is speaking about, and I felt the urge that I have to take the lead or to participate in voicing these issues.
Yeah. Yeah. I think what you're touching on is just an important point, which is the injustices that you're seeing that are most proximal to where you are. That's often the injustice most worthy of elevating and platforming. And if we all do that across all of our communities and all of our places and all the institutions in which we operate, that in volume really creates the kind of movement that we need at this moment. That's more disciplined and certainly more morally upright. So thank you for that message. I would love to sort of be able to sort of end on that note. I think it's a really powerful note to be able to end on. So today you heard from Yael about some of the ways in which refugee and humanitarian protection is endangered here in the United States, but certainly, in fact, everywhere, as you've just heard from across our panelists. Dan covered the world's largest displacement crisis in Sudan and the brave work of local actors like the emergency response rooms to deliver critical humanitarian aid, even in the face of extraordinary humanitarian assistance cuts by the US government and just other governments around the world. Jomana, thank you for joining us and really sharing sort of the telling tale of your own grandparents' dream to return to Yibna, and certainly sort of your vision to hopefully someday return to Gaza. And yeah, and inshallah that happens. And then William covered the critical layers of expertise that refugees have in being able to shape integration plans in Brazil for not just Venezuelans, but certainly for other migrants and other refugees. You challenged all of us to consider the real stakes of climate change with her jaw-breaking quote that refugees don't write climate reports, they live them. And for all of us across all our organizations and all our platforms, really, that is the crux of it. Refugees are living these realities every day. For some, like myself, I cover them professionally. I too am a refugee, but I cover them professionally. And so as we celebrate the extraordinary courage and the bravery of refugees, we must also be morally responsible in making sure that they are also centered in these discussions and these conversations so that they could proximally shape their realities, the lives of their families and their children and their community. So with that, thank you all so much. Thank you for joining us. Have a really wonderful rest of your Wednesday and World Refugee Day on Friday. All right. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.